Okay, y'all. Woo! You guys are so impressive. Okay, so I'm just gonna start with one sort of like lightning round, which is in sort of like one thought. Why do you care about care? And what excites you most about including caregiving in storytelling? We could go down the line. So we'll start with Lydia and go on down. No pressure, Lydia.
Okay. I'm going to try to be brief. I care about care because in 2020, I was working as a development executive in film and television. And I was a new mom to a 5-year-old baby who was diagnosed with developmental delays on the day the COVID pandemic shut the world down. So I kind of like had this wow moment of, okay, I have no childcare at home right now because, we were social distancing. And then we were told like, oh, hey, your child could probably benefit from things like PT and OT, but we don't know when we're going to provide those because hospitals and therapy centers are also closed due to social distancing. And so it just kind of was one of those things that I ran sort of headfirst into without like ever thinking about any of this. And then I started thinking about it all the time, of course. And also just being a mom at all, you start to learn that there's not a whole lot of support in our society for families or parents or anybody who needs or provides care. But as that sort of creative person, that development executive, I also had the part of me that was like, wow, there's a whole lot about care that people are dealing with, that are experiencing, that sometimes is really intense and dramatic, like what I just described, and also is sometimes hilarious and silly, and is very often like the actual stakes of our day. And I was like, oh, this is actually great opportunity for storytelling, right? It's a new dimension of the human experience. So I got really excited about when I got in touch with Carrying Across and the work that the organization was doing. I saw this opportunity to help bridge the gap between like what I thought was missing from our popular culture and to equip the people who were creating it with resources and the knowledge that I was gaining to hopefully have a little bit of fun with it and include it more in the film and TV that we're all consuming every day.
Amazing.
That was not very brief.
No, it wasn't at all. That was like 7 thoughts, but I loved them all. Okay, Vicki.
I'll try to be brief too. So I also got interested in how America supports or doesn't support families through personal experience. I was a lawyer at a big law firm when I had my child in 2008. And I, as a lawyer, had the benefit of 4 months and then 5 months of fully paid 100% parental leave, which is like unbelievably generous for this country. But within the walls of the firm that I was in, there were people who did not have that. So my secretary, who was a Black woman, would have had 60% of her pay for 12 weeks under short-term disability insurance policy. The hourly workers and the contractors in the building who were in the cafeteria and the mailroom and the janitorial staff and the backup child care center would have had little to no paid leave in the same circumstance. And the inequities, even just within that building, which are replicated all over this country as we have disparate or no leave policies at all, got me really passionate about fighting for paid family and medical leave. And so I started doing that in 2010. And when we got to the precipice of passing a national paid leave law in 2021, and then Congress failed to do that, I thought about what else we needed to do to create the scaffolding needed to make people see that they deserve these policies, and to have policymakers prioritize work-family policies in the same way that they sometimes prioritize climate or healthcare or other things that we think of as public goods. And so I started the project that we're talking about here today, Rescripting Gender, Work, Family, and Care, in an attempt to really get people to see their own lived experiences on screen, and also imagine alternative realities to create the echo chamber where people and also policymakers understand investments in things like paid leave and other policies that support gender equity, childcare, elder care, as well as things like equal pay, to be things that we all deserve and that do actually contribute to the economy and to our success.
Amazing. Awesome. Mfoniso.
Why do I care about care? I'm gonna answer this as a storyteller.
Love it.
That's
what
way
you're here for.
I know. And this might end up being really broad and feel simple, but I am really attracted to stories that do have a little bit of an anchor of some sort of loving in the center of it. And that is maybe, if you look at the display of that bio that you read, that is maybe the anchoring, the unifying principle. And I'm also the daughter of immigrants, proudly Nigerian American, and a lot of me and my cohort talk a lot about what is representation, the stories of women. I'm also queer people, immigrants, and how we care for each other is at the center of those stories. And like I said, I like love. It's one of my anchors. So I'm always inside stories that center care and want to be, even if my frontal cortex isn't always going, that's what it is. That's where I'm tracking to.
Love that. Liz.
I don't like love. No. No, I thank you so much for having me here. I mean, Sasha was a writer on Dying for Sex, and I honestly feel like that show for me opened a lot of these conversations, and I am frankly a little disappointed in myself that I didn't have these conversations in my head before working on that show. But like, I felt like having Sasha in the room and some of the other writers that we had in the room that had had experiences with cancer or chronic illness and long-term care. It was really eye-opening for me to just hear their stories and start to think about how to put that on screen. Yeah, I mean, it's infuriating. I love that we're like, it's good for the economy. Like, I just like, I can't. Sorry. Hey guys. Human beings are good for the economy. Yeah. I when I had kids, I think that was also a way in for me to be like, wow, like how little this country does to sort of support families is shocking. And I'm looking for, going forward, even more ways of putting some of these issues on screen.
Love that. Steve.
I just want to ask the panel real quick. As someone with a very short bio, how do you get those jobs? Damn, I'm impressed. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited about caregiving because it keeps me alive. And that's real. If it wasn't for other people, I wouldn't be here, literally here. It also shapes my perception on healthcare, which I'm sure is something I will ramble about later on. I think it's important to storytelling because I personally believe that every person on this planet is either directly affected by caregiving or knows someone who is directly affected by caregiving. And so if you want to tell a good, authentic, relatable story, you're probably going to include caregiving.
Yeah, absolutely. Seriously.
I could add one thing to Steve's bio. We should have included the fact that he's the newest member of the Caring Across Generations Creative Care Council.
Dang! Love that.
Which we're so excited about, not because he's such an amazing advocate, but also because he's so hilarious as well. And comedy is so important as we are trying to sort of break down these like cultural stigmas and hang-ups that we have of, addressing some of these topic areas.
Absolutely. That actually brings me to my next question. This is like perfect. Thank you. So
just trying to help.
I love it. Liz, this is for you. So caregiving is very much at the center of Dying for Sex. For those of you all don't know, Dying for Sex is a limited series in which Molly, our main character, who's played by Michelle Williams, has terminal cancer and asks if she can die with her best friend Nikki, who's played by Jenny Slate, instead of her husband Steve, played by Jay Duplass, for very good reasons. Nikki taking on that role was like a huge topic in the writer's room as we were developing her story arc. So how do you feel like the storyline evolved over the course of writing and producing the series?
Of Nikki's storyline.
Of Nikki's storyline.
Yeah,
but if you want to talk about Molly, go for it too.
No. I mean, I think it's funny having this conversation with you because we were in the room together. But I think that
I'm so trying not to be weird about it.
No, I mean, honestly, it was really hard coming up with her storyline, and I think that's also kind of something interesting to talk about because I think as viewers we're used to, putting the focus on the sick person or the, I mean, that's the drama or what, I don't know. I mean, so I think it was a really interesting kind of mental challenge of just like, okay, like how can Nikki's caregiving stories be just as compelling? And there were so many stories that came out of just talking to you and talking to the writers, and your husband came and talked to us, which was really great and really interesting. And I mean, I think that we tried to be honest about how hard it is, but also not kind of make her into a martyr. I don't know. It was a lot. We were having just it was just a lot of conversations. And I think I'm sorry, I don't, I lost the thread. Somebody save me.
No,
Somebody
absolutely.
caretake this question.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like one of the biggest challenges was we really wanted to like show the honest, real story of what it's like to be a caregiver for somebody who is going to die. So you want to be with them every single second of the day. And we really also heard that from Nikki Boyer, who made the podcast and who was real life Molly's best friend. But at the same time, like we also wanted to show the joy in giving care. And like Molly and Nikki are like absolute best friends. And they're so funny together, Liz. Like you did such a great job.
Yeah, no, there's so much joy. And then there's darkness and joy. And we really were trying to kind of show the full picture as much as we could. And it's like we heard from a lot of cancer patients and survivors. They didn't want the show to be, thank God you got cancer so I could figure out my spiritual health,
That was a pet peeve of mine in some movies.
So that was also a big focus, was like, how do we tell a caregiving story where the caregiver isn't like feeding off of their friend's cancer to like find themselves or something. So, I mean, these are all just like ongoing conversations in the writer's room that we were kind of constantly trying to manage and figure out. And
Totally. Awesome. Lizzie, crush that. Steve, as an actor, one of your best known roles is playing a version of yourself in the Hulu series Rami, alongside your real life best friend, Rami Youssef. It's a fabulous show, super funny. Together, you're both like so funny and also so real. And care is also an implicit part of that friendship dynamic. So what did you feel like that show got right about the nuances of care?
I think it got everything right. Because
It
I
did.
wrote it. That's real. And that's why I believe that show is so good and relatable. It's authentic. And it's specific. When Rami was in the writer's room, he would send me scripts along the way. And every time he sent me a script, he would say, read your parts and rate it how you would say it. If you're doing an action, rate it how you would do it specifically. We're not telling the overall Muslim story. We're not telling the overall disabled story. Rami Youssef is telling the story of Rami Youssef. And he allowed Steve White to tell the story of Steve White. We're not here to preach about the disabled community. We're not here to show a very broad picture of what it's like to be disabled. We're showing what I want to be disabled. And I think that's so important. Because caregiving does not exist in a vacuum. right? It's much more nuanced. It's specific to each person. And I think that's very important as the role of a caregiver. You must understand the person you are giving care to. Right, for example, my body is on fire right now because it's raining. All of the people I've known for a long time who take care of me on a very intimate level knows that from the second I get out of bed in the morning. Right, but it's that intimate level of caregiving that allows you to understand the specificities of the person you're taking care of. And that's what we do with Robbie. And I think we do a very good job of portraying that on camera. Right, there's a scene where Robbie eats my weed gummy. Right? So, he asked me what I would do in that situation. So that I've seen the woman that plays my mother grinds up a pill and puts it in pudding, which is exactly how I would do it. But it's that level of specificity that adds to the scene, adds to the interaction of me and Robbie, my mother, that makes it so funny, makes it so dark, but it makes it so relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. Mfoniso, lessons in chemistry included a number of work, family, and care stories seen through the lenses of a lot of characters on the show, actually. So you have the show is set in the 50s and 60s. There's Brie Larson's storyline as Elizabeth Zott, a chemist who faces a number of challenges between her work as a chemist and taking care of her daughter, and eventually leading to a new opportunity as a TV show host. And I was especially moved by Aja Naomi King's storyline as Elizabeth's neighbor, Harriet. Harriet is a lawyer and a mother who's also fighting to prevent a highway from being built over her neighborhood. To that end, I really felt like the TV series built on the book by diving more deeply into barriers beyond just gender, but also including race and socioeconomic status. Y'all really got a lot in there. How did the writing team feel that the caregiving aspect, sort of for the characters' kids, for themselves, and for each other, helped drive this rich and really complex story?
Yeah, so I was inside the writer's room beginning and middle, and then I flew off, and then that team led by Lee, really did some extraordinary work. But I do know from all the iterations, it was holding on to what is true, on what it is to build and caregive. And so for like Elizabeth Zott's character, what it is to have a little mad Maddie, and have to be negotiating. I mean, there's parts in this where she's really desperate for cash, because she has to care for this child, and she's a single mom, and she is negotiating things in order to care for this daughter that wasn't really planned either. Care for this daughter that is at direct odds sometimes with her career. Not sometimes, that's the story. Yeah. It's at odds with her career. And some really hard truths inside of that. I mean, Elizabeth Zott, Brie Larson's character, had to do certain things like selling away parts of her mind. Yeah. So to keep that lab running in order to keep her house running, she was doing some real negotiating. And then you've got Harriet, and she's caregiving for a community. And it's like eminent domain. We will build a highway. We are going to decimate the Black community. It is one of the things that I thought was such stellar storytelling. And true to the time, how these Black communities were truly thriving, and standing alone, economic drivers, and they were seen as potentially worthless. And Harriet stood up there as the lawyer and took a system down and gave for her community while holding her own at home and trying to give and shredding against that sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm just like regurgitating parts of the story to you, but the tension on how, I mean, that lessons in chemistry is like, how do you care for, while also holding on to whatever your day-to-day life demands, which doesn't have care at that kind of care at the center of it.
Yeah, absolutely. This brings me to our experts, Vicki and Lydia. What do you feel like is care inclusive storytelling, and how can it make people feel more connected to each other?
I just want to point out that I feel like all of the examples that you have all touched on so far is sort of proving the point that that feeling that I had of like there's so much richness in here and so many nuances. And I think like what I love about Caring Across Generations is that we take this very comprehensive view of care. It's something that we will all either need or provide or both at some point in our lives, whether that means we're raising a child or we're getting older or supporting an aging parent or we are disabled or become disabled or go through an illness or recovery. And at the underneath all of those experiences, there's like sort of two kind of commonalities, which is that in this country at least, all of that type of care, no matter how you're coming at it, is really costly. It costs people a lot of money, and it's way harder than it needs to be because we don't have a culture or sort of the social systems to support it. So I think the sort of theme of this conversation was like, how does being inclusive with care in our storytelling bring us closer together? And I think the reality is that when we see that those experiences that, whether we are a parent or we're somebody who's disabled or somebody who's, recovering from cancer, there are some commonalities in every aspect of that experience, and it helps us recognize and empathize with one another. And just to give a little bit of like data from research that we've done.
Ooh, give
Do
me
you
some
like
data.
You guys want some data?
Give me some numbers.
The Make Care Pop study that you mentioned was the sort of first comprehensive look at how care is portrayed on TV across aging and disability especially. And we looked at, with Gina Davis Institute, we looked at every show that aired in 2021, and we found that only 10% of them included any kind of care-related storyline. And the vast majority of those actually centered on parenting, which is very clearly also care. But I think it stands to reason then that when you see something like the very authentic and nuanced care storyline that came up in This Is Us, which was centered on caring for an aging parent, that sort of ran throughout the final season of that series, it really meant a lot to people. We were able to study that show as well with the Norman Lear Center at USC and looked at what was the audience response? How did that show impact audiences and how they like think about care in their lives? And it was so validating to people. And not only did they feel validated in their own experiences and like, it feels good to see yourself reflected. It also showed that people had more empathy for others who were going through care journeys or had care needs in their lives. So I think to sum that all up from my perspective, it's just the more that we can start layering all of these nuances and these experiences in authentic ways into our stories, whether or not it's the point of the show or the film, the easier it is for all of us to see that we have this in common and find a closeness to each other across our differences.
Yeah, absolutely. Vicki?
Yeah, and I'll build on that to say that when you have care at the center, you also have all of these other things that happen. And so thinking about how care relates to work and relates to finances and relates to health and relates to all the other things that flow from this fundamental human, loving, or fraught relationship takes us to a place where we have to think about what are the supports that are needed. And I actually, Steve's example of specificity and caring for Steve is about caring for Steve. is really important because everybody's care situation, everybody's relationship to work and family and caring for themselves and their loved ones is individual and specific. And sometimes the way that gets translated into political conversations is we can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. And that's actually not the point. The point is that we need scaffolding in place to create the kinds of supports, the financial support, the caregiving support, the health insurance, all of the other things that people need in order to be able to deal with their specific care situations. And these are common. So I'm going to throw some data at you also.
Woo!
That's what we do.
Let's
Beth.
do it.
Yeah, you gotta love the data. But we did a survey of streaming viewers in the US and found that 55% identified that they or somebody in their household had a work, family, or care situation. Another 43%, regardless of what their current situation was, expected to in the future. So this is something that we all are doing or we all expect to do. But only about 50% of viewers thought that they saw themselves reflected on screen, and 84% wanted to see more, and then wanted to see very specific storylines that embedded things like women being both capable caregivers and capable workers. We often only see one or the other, and that's also Gina Davis Institute research. When we see men on screen, like half of gender equity is actually giving men permission, cultural permission, and policy support to be more involved, to be able to provide care. But we don't often see that either. And we don't see the systems in place. One of the things I loved about Lessons in Chemistry was actually this really quiet, small scene where Brie Larson has caused all of this trouble in the network, in her television show, by questioning leadership, and they shut the show down for a couple of days. And she's talking to her hairdresser about whether her hairdresser was able to see her son's play. And the hairdresser says, no, like, you really messed this up. And I actually had to go work at a hair salon for a couple of days, and I missed my son's play because of this interruption. And so thinking about the relationships within workplaces, so the same way that I told my paid leave story, where other people didn't have the same thing, being aware of what the people around us have or don't have, and thinking about common ground. And then also thinking about consequences to care. So one of the elements I loved in Dying for Sex was, like, in the podcast, we didn't know this, and maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't in real life, but spoiler, like in the series, Nikki loses her job because she is providing care and she's just, like, not attentive, and she's a gig economy worker. And so that's like an extra layer of complication, which is probably very common to folks in this room. So I just think there are nuances to these stories that when we see them reflected in the course of characters doing entirely other things, sometimes it starts to normalize the idea that we all have care in common, that we all have these work-family challenges that might look the same or they might look different, but most of us don't have the support that we need. And that is more data. Just 27% of workers have paid family leave in this country. There is at least one statistic that says that nearly 25% of women go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth. 95% of dads take less than 2 weeks of paid paternity or 2 weeks of paternity leave. And childcare is more expensive than rent for 2 kids in every state in this country. So we have these big problems that need to be fixed.
And 160 million people are caring for someone else right now.
So yeah, this is, and when we see these things reflected, it can normalize our experiences, it helps us see others, and it helps us hopefully realize that it doesn't have to be this way and that there can be an alternative future.
I just
Yes, go
want
for it.
I'm so the data hit me. It hit me hard. It's raining data. No,
Got so much more.
I thought that what you said about specificity was so beautiful, and I think what my fumbling answer was kind of trying to get to was that I was so happy that we had writers in the room that had direct experience with these things. Because I think I, as a showrunner, kind of going into it was like, oh, this seems like I have so much I feel like I need to say, but I don't really have a specific way into it, and beyond just, being a parent, which doesn't feel like specific in this way. So I think we just have to keep pushing to have writers who have had experiences, with these things in the room, sharing their specific stories, and to have those writers be listened to and those stories be told, because I think that is so important. And I think that's how you get to seeing yourself on screen, is actually the more specific you get, the more universal it becomes. So I think that that's incredibly important in terms of these stories. Although it's hearing these statistics, it's hard to be like, oh, it's important that we.
But it is.
I was gonna.
But I know
like,
it is. It is. I'm just saying. It's like I'm like, oh god. Like,
I was just gonna say that so much of our not recognizing this in ourselves is that our culture doesn't acknowledge it. So when our culture acknowledges it, it starts this like reciprocal, like, effect of like, okay, well, oh, I now feel like I have permission to talk about it, or I now have permission to like come into work and be like, oh, people come to events that I host all the time, and that I know you host all the time, and recognize, like, come into it like wanting to learn something and leave feeling like, oh, I didn't realize it, but I also am a caregiver, or I have some, sort of care experience that, it unlocks the possibility of like actually showing up at work and sharing that.
I was gonna say also, caregivers. It's not news to me that caregivers love streaming television. Anyway, I feel like, so I do think it's like we should be thinking about telling their stories. But
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I don't know how many like. Oh, sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No. It's hard to see you. I'm so
No,
sorry.
thank you. No, it is all about the writing, because if you can't tell a good story, people won't get it. They won't like it. And in order to tell a good story, you have to have people who understand it. Right, and I say this to the showrunner. As a very unemployed writer, I would love to have my WGA insurance back, which I lost through the strikes. But if I could take that to the next step and kind of push my political agenda here, I believe that at its core, caregiving is healthcare. And a lot of people don't understand that, because they believe that healthcare is just going to the doctor when you get sick. Right, but it's so much more nuanced than that. Healthcare is the black woman who can't take a day off of work because she can't afford it, when her son gets sick and has to go to urgent care because the window in her apartment was broken and her landlord would not fix it. Healthcare is a farmer in rural Nebraska who gets hurt and can't get to the nearest hospital, which is an hour away. Healthcare is a trans woman living in Texas who doesn't want to go to see a doctor out of fear of her life. Healthcare is me worrying if I won't have help to get out of bed in the morning, right? Healthcare is infrastructure. It's tenants' rights. It's public safety. It's human rights. And a lot of people don't get that, because we're so used to it. We're so used to things just being so awful that we've accepted it. And of course there's another way, but we don't believe it's possible. Last year, I was working on a bill that would allow disabled people to get married without losing their health insurance. Medicaid is tied to income levels. Medicaid is the only form of insurance in America that pays for caregiving. You should have the best private insurance that this country has to offer, and it won't cover caregiving. Right? And when the new administration came to power, that bill went out the window. And now, I'm fighting to protect Medicaid. We went from fighting for extra rights to progress as a society to now fighting to just stay alive. People are dying already because of bad healthcare. Not no healthcare, bad healthcare. And when there's no healthcare, a lot more people are going to die. Right? So, in order to protect the caregivers, we must protect healthcare. Because healthcare is caregiving. Right? And honestly, as a writer, and an employed writer, I have to say it, It's always, guys, everything is a job interview.
Steve, you're not unemployed, you're available. Steve is
what?
available to work. And excited and a fantastic writer, and everybody should hire him.
Thank you. If we don't have healthcare, we won't have caregivers. Because when Medicaid is cut, which it probably will be in a couple months, the wages for caregiving are going to drop. The amount of hours in which people like me can pay caregivers for will drop. You want to protect caregivers, protect health care. I know it sounds like it's a lot of steps, and it is. But we have to take those next steps to make sure that it protects everyone. Disabled people, low-income people, minorities. We have to help them. And when we help them, we are indirectly helping caregivers. And as a writer, sorry, I went off track. As a writer, I would love to see more of that nuance portrayed on screen. So, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, can we just clap for that? Thank you, Steve. Jeez. That was amazing. That was seriously incredible. And it just made me, I was going to ask Lydia and Vicki just to talk a little bit about policy for a second and what is what is going on and what can we do about it? And why is storytelling important to fighting back against these really super scary rollbacks?
Yeah, well, I'll start and Lydia can kick in. So, no surprise. If you are a person who believes in policies around care or healthcare investments or human rights or civil rights, things are not going well right now at the federal level. We're about to have a big conversation. Well, Congress is about to have a big conversation about taxes and about revenues in this country and tax cuts for the rich and for corporations, which could be extended or even expanded upon from 2017. And what that means is taking money from other programs. So
taking money from us.
Taking money from us, which is spent on Medicaid, is spent on food assistance, is spent on housing, is spent on energy for low income, to subsidize heat for low income people. And these are interconnected. Like Steve made a really good point. We often think of these policy issues in silos. We often think of storytelling in silos, but actually they're all connected. The same person who needs healthcare probably also needs food and is also worried about toxic chemicals in their kids' drinking water.
Or a highway getting built through their community.
Or a highway getting it's not only 1950 that this happened. And so we have Medicaid under attack, and Caring Across is doing a great job leading a coalition on that. We have childcare assistance that could well go away. We have a child tax credit that actually was expanded in some ways in 2017 that could be rolled back to regular levels if they don't decide to extend the improved child tax credit, which was not as good as the child tax credit that existed in 2021, but is better than the child tax credit that existed in 2016. So there's a lot that's at stake in what's happening right now, and I think it sometimes feels really intractable. Even for somebody who has been steeped in this work for the last 16 years, it feels really hard to know what to do. And that means storytelling is even more important because And that's storytelling that you all do through screenwriting. It's storytelling in journalism. It's storytelling on social media. It's helping to put a human face on the challenges that people are facing, on the needs that we have, and ultimately, whatever happens right now, which could be very bad, but also storytelling and advocacy and organizing can help to stem the tide. We're seeing some lawmakers who might otherwise, I'm going to be nonpartisan here because we're in this space, but I'm sure you can tell what I'm talking about. There are some lawmakers who probably were inclined to accept really big cuts in Medicaid and other things that will disproportionately hurt rural communities, for example, who are now somewhat holding a line to say that they won't accept massive, massive cuts. So telling stories, being part of activities to tell your members of Congress and the administration and the press and your neighbors what it is that you need is really, really important. And then ultimately, storytelling also can lead us to a place where we can see out of this kind of dark moment that we're in to something that looks better. And that feels really hard to do right now. But I think it's essential because otherwise we get stuck feeling helpless and hopeless instead of resolved and resilient and willing to keep fighting for better for each other, for ourselves, for each other, and for ultimately like our children and other people that will come after them.
I have a couple thoughts to add on to that. I will say that what's really interesting about Medicaid is that we have polled voters and we know that it's incredibly popular. Like 70% of voters, regardless of political affiliation, actually support Medicaid. And so it's really an interesting kind of maybe hopeful illustration of people coming together around something that we actually all kind of collectively support. So that's sort of maybe a beacon of like light in the darkness. But that said, I do think that there's a really poignant opportunity for creative people and storytellers because part of why programs like this get attacked is that they're stigmatized. We don't understand how they fit into our lives. To build on the point Vicki was making before, the same study that we did with Gina Davis Institute found that 0.01% of TV shows actually acknowledge any sort of care policy. So that includes paid leave, which I took when I had a child. That includes mentioning that I have a workplace subsidized childcare. That includes a character being a beneficiary of Medicare or Medicaid. And by the way, most people don't actually know that Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. Medicaid covers long-term care. But a lot of people, like a very, very large amount of people, discover that only at a moment of crisis. And so I think there's like really great potential for creative people to find creative ways to kind of pepper that into our popular culture and help us like recognize and value and like appreciate all of the systems that we all need and deserve, as opposed to just kind of leaving it over there as like, oh, that's just boring, right? No, it's actually the fabric of life. We can find fun ways to make nods to it. And to Vicki's point, also make nods to not just the things that do exist in our world, but the ones that could, because they exist elsewhere. I mean, I think I'm struggling to think of the show, but I feel like there was something that made a joke about the fact that other countries have childcare. We don't have, subsidized childcare here. Maybe you don't know, but if there's anything coming out in the Grey's Anatomy realm, the state of Washington, there is a public long-term care insurance program for every resident of that state. Like it's finding
and
ways.
paid family and medical leave.
There you go. So it's like finding ways to make nods to those things like that help us see the possibilities of like, oh, not only do I like shouldn't feel bad about needing these things, but in fact, like we should demand more of them.
Yeah, and just to call out actually a couple shows that have done a great job recently, because I think they make the point, like these can be in extremely popular shows, and they don't have to be the main point, but the more that they can be layered in, the more people will see. So the ABC show High Potential, which is like one of the most popular new shows, in the very first episode, Kaylin Olsen's character talks about her lack of childcare, and when she gets this job offer to be an investigator for the LAPD, she negotiates both a salary and a childcare stipend, which I was like, what just happened? This is amazing. The opening show of The Neighborhood, which is a CBS sitcom, this season had one of the main characters telling his father that he was going to take the paid paternity leave that was offered through their workplace, which, by the way, is in California, where they do have a paid leave program. So, like, I would have liked to have seen that, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's normalizing the idea that these are just things that we should have, or that we do have, and we should take. And it doesn't have to be the main point. It can be woven into any story in the way that it's woven into our lives.
Yeah, I love all of that. Oh my
Or
gosh.
put a little sex around it too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or put a lot of sex.
A puppy collar was
Oh
like
my
the best.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, add some butt plugs.
That's always the answer.
I mean, like I said, I'm waiting for work. You want to talk about authenticity? Specificity.
To bring it back to yes, to storytelling and to what we're seeing on TV. Liz, you really mentioned that how important it was to have writers in the room who had a variety of experiences, and I really felt that as somebody in the room. It was like, you know, I'm sure a lot of us on this stage have felt tokenized in our workplaces and times, and this was a room that was like, nobody was a token, which was really great. Everybody's voices were heard, and everybody had their own unique experiences with caregiving, with receiving care, amongst all the other storylines that we were doing, which was a lot. And so I just wanted to ask all of the writers on stage and performers on stage, how do you feel about care in the context of diversity and inclusion, the way that our room was so wonderful and diverse and inclusive, both as a matter of representation in workplace, in like as representation on screen, like how we were able to do it in the storytelling, but then also in workplace practices. Little brag about Liz and camera showrunners is they are both parents and did a really great job of making sure that we never stayed late, or, you know, we, like, you know what I mean? Like they ran a very good schedule that was like also a very human schedule, and were really understanding of like me going to doctor's appointments.
Yeah, I mean, it's I will say it's interesting that like some of these issues, it's not just what's on screen, but like what's happening, you know, off screen. I mean, when I started New Girl, I was 29 and I didn't have kids, and I didn't understand what it meant to like take leave when you have kids. And the male writer, a male writer on my show was like, my wife's having a baby. And some other male writers were like, oh, he gets a week off. And I was like, okay, you get a week off, whatever. Like that, it was like this kind of like understood, like that's what it is. And then by the time we ended New Girl, I was like forcing, you know, the male writers to take a month off if they had a baby. And even a month is like, you know, I, as someone with 3 kids, I understand that that's not a lot. But I do think that sort of like the culture in the writers' room for many, many years, and still is like, you know, it was a lot of men, and there was, you know, not like I need to get home to my family was not considered something that was a good thing to say in the writers' room, you know. So, and I think a lot of entertainment is not built around having families, and, you know, the hours are not built around that. So I think some of this conversation, it all is connected of like, you know, the more people that are caregivers who are in the writers' rooms, these real stories come up, the conversations change, and actually the whole culture changes too. So, I mean, I feel like I've gone on a bit of a journey with it myself of just like how to run a room and how to, I think paternity leave is really strange and hard, and in the workplace. So that was my particular experience with that. But just like making sure that is something that is encouraged, you know. It's like,
well, also a little shout out, like the Writers Guild, our insurance didn't cover paid parental leave until 2020. So like, you know, not only would it have been hard to take leave, like because of the culture of the writers' room, also like there was not a policy in place, but now we do have 8 weeks of paid parental leave with our health insurance. So for all you writers out there, and you don't have to be working to take it, you have to have earned your health insurance, but that's it. Mfoniso.
I was gonna say it's in the way the room is run, like you were saying, and also when you are, say, designing the stories and you have different writers in that room, like Steve was saying too, it can be highly specific, person to person, and then there's also culture to culture. There's and I experience sometimes that care, the way it can be invisible and unknown. I'm gonna bring an anecdote out, but like in the Little America room, as we are looking at the episode The Cowboy, which I ended up writing on, knowing that caretaking wasn't happening inside the house. This is an immigrant sending money home in order to caretake that way. That's a different way of conceptualizing care and understanding the needs on that student, the pressure on that student as countries are potentially falling apart, lives are falling apart, and I'm holding the care of this small family on this compound, and what I make is tied to how they exist, how they're surviving. And those are ways in which I don't know that we also think about care in the bodies, or a situation like this, which is outside the what you see on the screen. But I've had most of my Black women friends have gone through fibroid surgery, and that takes kind of care right after it. And when you there's not language for what that is, and inside writers' rooms and inside of my friends' lives, it can be boiled down to period problems. And that's not the case.
No.
You're going through something. So the more that we have diverse bodies, the more there actually might be somebody that I could talk to, whisper to for my care in the room, and then also my care inside, or the care of a community inside Storie, and highlighting that.
I love that. Steve, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to miss you in case you wanted something to add. You don't have to, but I wanted to make sure I didn't miss you.
No, thank you. Yeah, I thought it's still storytelling. It's all real life. You know, like when I talk about my stories, like, okay, for example, I had WTA insurance. It was incredible. And through that, I was approved for a new wheelchair at no cost. That had never happened before. That's how good that insurance is. And then the strikes happened. And just when I was going to have my wheelchair sent to me, my insurance expired. Which sent me back all the way to the beginning. Because in order to get in a wheelchair, you must have health insurance up until the date of delivery. So when I lost my insurance, I then had to go through Medicaid. It took me 3 years. And I was finally approved for that new wheelchair the week after that CEO was shot. My disability didn't mean shit. It was just because they were afraid. Now, it's hard, right? Because we all know what happened, right? Nobody was surprised by what happened. I think we all have horror stories when it comes to healthcare, right? I am as radical as they come. I'm a card-carrying socialist. I am, for one reason. I do not believe that anyone should go bankrupt because they get cancer.
Seriously?
As I keep speaking for a bit, can I get, my caregiver up here? Because my tube slipped. I just pulling my head back. Now, when this happened, there was a big discussion about healthcare. Thank you. Caregiving in action.
I love that.
Thank you. Right, there was a big discussion. Has the health insurance industry gone too far? And we all know that they have. Right? Now, I don't support what happened. Again, I'm as radical as I come. I don't support what happened. I did name my wheelchair Luigi. I have a little Luigi on the side of my chair. But I don't support it. I don't. Because it makes my job harder. As someone who fights for healthcare the right way. It's not up to us to pass judgment onto others. It's not up to us to play judge, jury, executioner. We must do this the right way. We speak up. We make phone calls. We take to the streets. We speak. We tell jokes. We make videos for social media. That's how you get change done. Not by taking lives. But that, what happened, was the logical outcome. When you live in an unjust society where people die for the simple fact that they don't have enough money, of course that's going to happen. I'm surprised it hasn't happened earlier.
Honestly, sometimes I think about, like, what would my life be like if I wasn't constantly thinking about how to make my health insurance that year? What would I be thinking of? Like, what would I be doing? What would I be writing? What sort of chances would I be taking if I wasn't constantly like, okay, have I made my $45,000? And then thinking as soon as I make it, then it's the next year. I'm thinking like, well, what about next year? And what's there's like a game in my head of like, okay, well, if it falls through here, then like we have a great thing in New York State where you can get like an extension of if you work in the entertainment industry, you can get an extension of your COBRA that is like highly subsidized. But it's like, so I think about that, but you can only take that once every 5 years. It really is like, how much would our lives, like how much of our, like just take a second to think about how much of your life you would get back if you didn't have to think about these problems all the time in every single like moment of your day.
Yeah, and so I think like that's such a great point. I think that's also the case of what would people do if their childcare options were totally unfettered and they could decide. Like we're seeing a lot of conversation right now about pronatalism, about like we don't have enough babies.
I have no idea what that word means.
Sorry, yeah. So
that seems like a DC word.
It is a DC word, but like it's all
We're in New York City.
So they like the White House, like there are people actually like as a statistical matter, we need more babies in this country to have enough Social Security, to have enough workers, to have enough caregivers. Like we are
or more immigrants.
Totally.
Love immigrants.
We need more people.
And sorry, wait, did you want to say
so
I'm having feelings.
Yes, I have a lot of feelings.
I'm having feelings because it's also I just even in holding that it's so also deeply tied to a kind of racism as well, just to like call it what it is.
Yeah,
totally.
Let's
we
say
only
it.
want certain
Let's say
babies.
the
We
word.
only want certain babies, and so you caught the spirit rear out of me.
Yes.
Yeah,
and,
I saw
it.
and I couldn't hide my face.
Yeah,
No.
you shouldn't have to.
But-
Because that's true.
Yeah, but like to your point, to this point, like people don't have freedom. Like the freedom has been a word that has been used in service to deregulation and to fostering individualism, but actually what it's done is constrain all of our choices. And if we actually if we had the kinds of supports that we're talking about up here, that we're envisioning around care and finances and options, we would actually be freer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to say also along with the pronatalism, which made me go, I haven't heard it put like that ever.
Oh, yeah. No, it's like
or I didn't know the
like
word.
the JD Vance buzzword right now.
Awful.
Yeah.
And
no.
so
Very scary.
it's I think it's couched in something that looks like I will give you $5,000 in order to have a
baby,
child.
yes.
But on
following the conversation.
I have been. I have
Yeah.
deeply
Yeah.
because it as somebody who wants children and is going through my own whatever that is in order to figure that out. This is an interesting, whenever I see babies anywhere, I'm like, interesting conversation. I'm heading towards it. But it's couched in the language of care and given money to it. But on what planet is $5,000 going to help you
Right. Like,
with a baby?
yes, $5,000
And childcare and healthcare and like
Right.
drinking water.
And
that's safe.
you're cutting childcare, you're cutting healthcare,
Yes.
you're cutting Medicaid, you're
Exactly.
cutting all the things,
Yeah.
and you're gonna give us $5,000 instead. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Like, what's that gonna
Yeah.
do? Okay.
The stat that I was really surprised to learn personally was that Medicaid covers 4 in 10 births in this country.
Yeah.
So
Look at that.
we're going to
That's
cut
wild.
Medicaid, stop paying for 40% of births, and then also
It's
give
only
them.
the other babies we want.
No, I
Um,
understand.
There's something about, just to bring it back to writing. I mean, I there's something about like the hero's journey that's so like essentially, like you were talking about being a socialist. It's just like there's I think a lot of shows and they celebrate characters that kind of figure stuff out on their own, or there's something sort of like inherently selfish, or like I don't need help about like a lot of heroes that you see. And so it's just interesting. As I was sitting here listening to everybody, I was like, yeah, it's why don't more of our heroes end up in their journeys realizing that they need help? And I don't know, that there is, like, I think in this country there's so much shame and stigma around asking for help, and it's like, it feels like that kind of storytelling, I think, is part of what we can do too, is just like there's so much to be gained from that, and I don't know.
How cool would that
and this
be
is
to
what-
see a movie where like, or a TV show where like at that moment, in that moment where like we get to the all is lost and the hero is supposed to like figure everything out for themselves, and then they literally like shed all of the people who've helped them along the way, and then they go, it's called the seizing the sword moment. Like, it's also very male.
Maybe they should be like a Medicaid Avenger.
Yes, exactly. Like, I'm like, well, what would happen if instead that's like when they like got the Avengers, right? And like got everybody together and actually everybody combined to solve the solution, like to solve the problem together and like work as a community.
Well, and this is like what our data shows that audiences actually want to see. They want to see people in community being
Yes, you
helped
hit
and
it.
being supported. They want to see people like speaking proudly and not apologizing. They want to see workplaces that are supportive. They want to see people looking for and finding solutions. So that are policy based.
No, I love that. Also, this is like our last chance to talk. We also like we're not doing Q&A, y'all. We just said we're having too much fun. I'm so sorry, but this is just like the best panel ever. So as we wrap up, I just want to make sure we hear from everybody like one last time. Maybe just on this topic of like, what would we like to see in storytelling in the future around caregiving? Like, what is our assignment like as writers and actors as we leave this place?
I mean, I was just going to compliment Liz and you on, I think Dying for Sex is actually doing something that I've been wanting to see more, which is to actually embrace that like innate human desire to like actually show up for, take care of, be there for the people that matter to us, and actually treat that with a lot of dignity and respect and as a strength and something to aspire to. I'd love to see more of that. Absolutely.
Love it.
So thank you for
Yay.
that. And to Liz's point, also characters having permission to ask for help, modeling that so that we get out of this sort of individualistic, mindset of, I have to do it all for myself or therefore I failed.
Yeah.
Vicki.
I want to see more solutions. I think we're seeing a lot more problems. Like we're seeing problems.
Yeah.
We're seeing, caregivers who are working like entering the multiverse. And everything everywhere all at once. For example, we're seeing, overwhelmed people having these crazy experiences. in Night Bitch, for example, we see a woman go feral because of, sort of the like dissatisfaction with the way that her life is as a suburban mom. But we're not always seeing solutions. And so I want to see more of the like, what is the problem? What's the solution? And how do we praise people looking for help and finding it and imagining a different future? And I want to see more chosen family. I want to call out Dying for Sex also for chosen family. So many people, particularly in disabled people, queer folks, older folks, are people who are living far from their families, are in relationship with people who are not related by blood, but are deeply their families. And I think that's another important thing to show.
Love that. Mfoniso.
I too agree that I would love to see more stories where it's not noble. It's not the individual that like yanks the story forward and you're like, yay, we did it. And the audacity to see how, in a lot of times when systems don't work for us, the community has to come together to also help inside that caretaking. And the more mirrors we show, along with dropping the places that we can go in order to get help, might actually give us the legibility, the vocabulary to seek those out and then build more, because I think we'll need more. And then also, very selfishly, I would love to see more nuanced stories on what caregiving looks like in the Black and immigrant communities. I do think that these are sunken spaces, and those are two different communities, Black American community and immigrant community, where sometimes like a very Western logics also don't play out. And so what is that? And then as somebody who is a Black woman and queer, and very, very specifically would love to see what caregiving looks like when you don't have support systems in healthcare in and around fertility. Would be extraordinary, because the pre-process is hard, and then sometimes if you are also haven't found your found family yet, the post-process can be difficult. So what is community and coming together and caregiving inside stories like that? Maybe I will write it one day.
Love it.
Please do.
Yeah, do it. Do it. A lot.
That was all. I'm like, dude, you know. No, I mean, this panel's been so wonderful. Just hearing, I don't know, I've learned so. I want to see Steve get a job.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. I want to see vulnerable stories. It's like my one of my favorite sayings. Who watches the Watchmen? Who cares for the caregivers? But burnout is real. It can split up friendships, relationships, families. And it's not their fault. But the system fails the caregivers. But if caregivers were, adequately taken care of, we wouldn't be talking right now. But there's an epidemic of this need for care. And one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that any person on this planet can need care tomorrow. Life is that fragile. Anyone can become disabled at any time. And if you live long enough, you will require care. Caregiving is an investment. Right, when there's equal access, when everyone can provide and receive care, benefits everybody. Tell those stories. Not every story needs to have that happy, feel-good ending. And that's okay. That's life. But we gotta tell those stories too. That's how you make people feel related to.
Absolutely. Well, I just wanted to give it up for our amazing panel. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of the Writers Guild of America East, the Women's Salon, the Career Longevity Salon, and the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, thank you, everybody, for being here today to talk about the importance of using narrative storytelling to create awareness around the complexity of work, care, and family. This was such a fun and fascinating and lively conversation. I learned so much. I hope you all did too. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your stories with us. And everybody, thank you so much for coming. There are some resources that our experts have curated for you outside. They're on a table on the way out. And I believe Lydia and Vicki are going to hang out for a little bit longer if you'd like to connect with them specifically. So thank you all so much for joining us.